Hello and welcome to the latest HFS Fireside video cast. This time we're with Indico Data's CEO, Tom Wilde. And HFS decided that Indico Data should be a OneOffice Hot Vendor because it's on a mission to put AI in the hands of business users who want to solve real business problems. There's a lot of AI hype out there in terms of actual use of whether it's usually at either the data scientists' control and massively confusing for everyone else, or it's at this kind of face-to-face with the consumer world and with the likes of Siri or, dare I say, Alexa. Let's see if it wants to join in. I think I've got away with it. So obviously, that kind of data science end is where mad scientists play. But for a lot of the time, what we need is a usable AI that's going to work in the enterprise. And we think that Indico Data offers a really good step towards that because of its approach, in particular, to all of that inaccessible, unstructured data. So, Tom, tell us how you're making all of this practical in the enterprise of hope.
Yeah, perfect. And great to be here. You know, I think that, as you point out, the interest in artificial intelligence and machine learning has exploded over the last few years with good reason, right? I think that, you know, I've been in the enterprise content space now for 25 years, and deep learning in particular has completely transformed the way what I'll call fuzzy problems have been able to be solved, right? So things like speech to text, machine vision, NLP. You know, deep learning has profoundly transformed the way and the ability for us to approach and solve those problems. One of the most profound is that, you know, the way I like to describe deep learning to people who aren't that familiar with it is, you know, for the first time, we can teach the machine by example, right? So if you think about everything that's come before it, we had to teach the machine by instruction, which is really software code, you know, usually regular expressions, you know, decision engines, OCR, those are all kind of software-based approaches to this problem. Now that we can teach the machine by example, it observes what we're doing and learns how to do that. We suddenly have the ability to put this in front of a business user as opposed to a technical user. So I'll stop there for a second. That's kind of the background as to you know what's happened in the market in terms of the sea change here.
And that in itself is fascinating. But let's try to understand a little bit about what you guys saw that was wrong in the market before you even launched it. Why you started? What's the mission that you felt you were on? And it's often down to, well, what did you see that other people were doing wrong that you thought we can do this better?
Yeah, I think the real focus we have is, and we like to describe it as solving the human-machine intersection, right? Because that's what we saw was missing in the market. I think that early on in AI, there was too much emphasis on algorithms and, you know, the development of these machine learning models, and that was it, right? There wasn't enough thought around how to bring that and put that in the hands of the subject matter expert. I think the common misperception was the goal here is a robot, right? This sort of notion of straight through processing. And many customers sort of incorrectly begin their process by defining that as the required success, the required outcome, this notion of you know, perfection, straight through processing. The reality is that's not AI today. AI is much more of a bionic arm than a robot. That's a much better metaphor for how to think about AI. So that introduces a whole bunch of interesting questions, which is, well, what does that intersection look like? And there's really two things that we set out to solve. One was, when it comes to AI, training data is crucial, right? It's incredibly important. Most enterprises don't have enough training data, and they don't have the right people looking at and providing that training data. So in the category of not enough training data, we developed an approach using transfer learning by building a huge proprietary training set that sort of solves the first 99% of the training data problem, leaving that last 1% for our customer. Okay, so what does that last 1% look like? Well, we really believed that the subject matter expert needs to be the person supplying and curating that training data, not the data scientist. the data scientist is really good at the science of this, but typically is not an expert in claims or customer onboarding or compliance, or whatever the use case may be. The subject matter expert is the person who's best suited to sort of articulate what the right shape of that training data should be. So that led us down the path of really focusing on our point-and-click application interface so that you could accomplish this without software programming expertise or data science expertise.
So what does that look like on a daily basis? There's two challenges there. One is when you're still having to talk about AI and ML, right? That's a turn on for some folk, but it's a glazing over moment for others, and potentially for the kind of people that you have to sell the thing to in the first place, right? So how do you convince a boardroom that what you're going to do is create positive outcomes for them?
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, having been in the software industry my whole career, the best technology is technology that sort of speaks for itself, right? Just through the outcome it delivers. If you have to go into tremendous detail around how it works, then you've sort of missed the point, right? Like if we use an everyday example of like a refrigerator, you don't go into Best Buy and have them discuss the science of Freon, right? That's not how you buy a refrigerator. You're interested in the size of it. Does it have a water dispenser? Does it make ice? Those are sort of outcomes that you're looking for as a consumer. The same is true here, that we have customers very interested in what goes on under the hood. They really want to understand it, because when they see the outcome, they're like, well, how are you accomplishing that? But then we have a set of customers who don't really care about that. They just want to know that it's going to work, right? It's going to solve their problem. So that's where the investment we've made in our application is really important, because that's how our customers experience the outcome of what we've delivered. In fact, much of the complexity, we've pushed underneath the surface, so they don't have to think about it. They don't have to worry about that. And that's where I think a lot of AI projects miss the mark. In fact, the majority of AI projects still don't make it to production in the enterprise. Well over half, more like 80% fail. And we have a 95% success rate in getting to production. And that's because it's not just about the model. It's about the explainability of these models in a practical way. It's about deploying them into production. It's about curating the output so that you can get the results you're looking for. Those are the things that allow our customers to become successful and capture that ROI. Of course, there's very, very robust and complex technology under the hood, but that's generally not why customers buy technology.
So let's, I'm going to ask you in a moment to tell me about some of those big wins, those case studies to show us what the value is. But you mentioned explainability just then, and that's something that I'm interested in. And I think it's something that is important in a lot of particularly regulated industries. They need to know how the decisions are being made, and they need to have a paper trail for that, a digital trail at least for that. So tell me a bit about how you are able to share that level of detail without giving away, I guess, the secret sauce that's driving it.
It's funny, I think that the first wave of AI providers, there was this notion of secret sauce that has to be protected. We kind of took the opposite tack. It's a sort of core value at Indico, is that we reject this notion of the secret black box, right? That does something that is sort of mysterious, and the vendor has to sort of protect that. And so, what we heard from customers is they would be pitched from vendors who would say, that's our secret black box. We can't show you what's in there. Just trust us, it works. And now big enterprises are rejecting that, right? They're saying, well, our compliance requirements, our regulatory requirements don't allow us to do that. We have to know what's in there. How is it working? How is it making its decisions? And that's a critical point of the use of AI ethically, is you have to understand how it's been trained, how it's making its decisions, what you can do to correct decisions and bias when they occur. AI is not biased, right? It doesn't know anything until you teach it. So this sort of no black box mantra is really important to us. Our customers build their own custom machine learning models, And our application includes a point-and-click dashboard that allows them to, at all times, be able to explore how the machine made its decisions. Why is it making this extraction? Why is it making this classification? Using data science best practice metrics, precision, recall, all the things that data science would care about. And typically they're collaborating with the subject matter expert within our platform to make sure they can provide the compliance metrics to the governance folks, right? That's a very, very important part of deploying this safely and at scale. So that was a major investment we made. We also built in, and I'll go a little bit technical for a second, in machine learning, you need to have what's called a holdback set, which you use to test the performance of a model and understand its predictions. Well, that's a very complex thing to do if you're a business user. So we built that into our platform. We actually build in this holdback set. It also prevents users from what's called overfitting when they're using AI, which is to bias the model in a certain direction just to make sure one particular outcome. It's like solving it backwards, right? That's a bad way to build AI. That's how you introduce bias. So we built all that into the product to make sure that when we got to the VP of compliance, we were able to completely answer their questions and deliver the metrics and the understanding that is so critical.
And that's interesting to me because if I'll take you back a little there has to be something in the outcomes that is surprising to the SMEs in order for you to be creating value.
Yep.
So could you tell us about some of those surprises and what impact they've had?
Yeah, there's two big surprises. I'll kind of break them into the two pieces. So when it comes to building models and training and assembling training data, one thing our application allows you to do is have multiple people label this training data, right? You only need a couple hundred examples to build a model with Indico, which is a very, very small amount in the machine learning world. But we allow you to have multiple people label this data. So something fascinating occurs when we do this with customers. We'll say to the customers, okay, so we're going to solve use case X. You've been doing this use case for, in some cases, like in insurance, decades, right? Like, oftentimes manually. So do you all agree on how these claims documents, should be labeled to teach the machine? They'll say, yes, of course. Like we've been doing this for a long time. So what happens is then they'll go in and they'll each label the data set and we'll compare the results. And more often than not, they're quite divergent, right? They are not the same. And when we show that to the customer, they're often really surprised by that, right? That they've been under this impression that they have this very wrung out process, but in fact they don't. So it forces sort of this discussion internally. Okay, let's get on the same page about how we do things with this use case. So that's surprise number one, always illuminating and really helpful for them to sort of get on the same page and wring out this variability in a process they thought was highly homogeneous. Surprise two is that the machine can learn from what they're doing so quickly, right, and deliver these very high quality results. In our case, our real strength is around unstructured, meaning you don't know where the information is going to appear in the document. Let's use documents as our example here. And you don't necessarily know what the context or syntax is within those documents. That's the hardest part of the problem to solve in the sort of NLP landscape. And because we approach this with a contextual approach, they're really shocked when it understands the difference between the date of loss and the date of filing, right? Which this is one of the big challenges in NLP, which is lots of NLP can find a date in a document, but it can't contextualize that date to know, oh, that's the date of loss, this is the date of filing. So that's a big aha moment for folks is, wow, how did it know how to do that?
In terms of the second part of that, the second part of the question around the value that generates, can you talk us through an example where, and you may or may not be able to name the customer, it's entirely up to you, but what difference you've been able to make for a client?
Yeah, I'll use a good example at very large scale, right? So we have a client who processes every title and deed filed in the United States every day, right? So there's over 50 million residential real estate transactions that happen in the United States every year across 3,200 counties. In those 3,200 counties, they each have about 50 different document types that make up, various elements of a title or deed filing. So that's 150,000 different variants of documents across the United States related to titles and deeds. So now you understand sort of the scope of this problem, right? So what our customer wants to do is extract about 200 data points from each transaction and turn that into a structured data set, which they then in turn sell to various sort of B2B end users, real estate, realtor sites and real estate engines and things like that. Well, historically, they tried to do this pure brute force. They just had people, see it and key it, right? They had to review every document, manually data enter this, very tedious work, and very repetitive and fraught with the potential for error, right? Because you've got, again, lots of different people. You think they're all on the same page about how to process these documents, but they're likely not. And so with Indico, with just a half a dozen custom machine learning models, we are able to build this contextual understanding of titles and deeds and these 200 data attributes, extract that information, turn it into a structured payload, right? So they went from it taking oftentimes several days to process, a document down to minutes, from costing, X to it costing, 1/3 X to process a title or deed. And they were able to free up tremendous amounts of resources to put them on other projects to build, additional data products rather than doing this sort of rote work that was, very expensive, very tedious, error prone. And so that's a dramatic impact that we had on that particular process as a good example.
Do you mind if we just dig into that a little bit? Because often one of the charges against any kind of automation, no matter how smart, is yes, you've freed up some people to do other things. What value did the freeing up of those people actually deliver? It always seems to be a claim that we like to make about a number of FTEs that we might have saved, headcounts, whatever. It's easy to see it from a cost-saving point of view. Less easy to express in terms of new value created. Are you trying to bring any of that kind of metric into your evaluations?
Yeah, I think another good example would be better decision making by being able to leverage unstructured data, which has been historically, opaque to customers. So I'll give you a different use case. We have an insurance customer who, one of the underpinnings of any insurance company is their actuarial risk models, right? And I always like to say that actuaries were actually the original data scientists. Both my parents happen to be actuaries. They were the original data scientists, right? I mean, that is what an actuarial model is. It is trying to predict risk using some set of inputs. So the key with an actuarial model is the higher quality your inputs, the more inputs you have, the better your risk model is going to be. That's just kind of a basic tenet of it. So if you have a tremendous amount of unstructured data that could theoretically contribute to that risk modeling, boy, you'd like to get a handle on that and be able to pull out the data that could improve your model. So we had a major insurance company. They process workers' comp documents on a continuous basis. They built up this huge archive of several 100,000 of these documents. They knew that there was data in there that could improve their risk model, but they estimated it was going to take them 3 person years to hand key all this information in. So with Indico, and there was no one doing it today. So it's not like, they didn't have anybody doing this. They just wanted to create new value from this. So with Indico, they were able to build a set of custom models and workflows, and in a couple of weeks, process the entire archive and build up a pipeline now that they can continuously process these documents, feed it into their actuarial risk models, and thus improve their decision making. And so you could argue that that's much more of a top line benefit, right? They're able to price those products more correctly, improve their loss ratios, the consumer benefits because they're getting a true, accurate pricing of risk, and our customer benefits because they're that much more intelligent around their decision making. So that's another category of use cases that I've seen customers take advantage of.
Excellent. So let me wind you back a little to think about the journey Indico's been on. As far as I understand it, it started off as an idea from a university team. So
that's right.
Just talk us through the journey that gets you to where you are today. I know you took investment last year or the year before, actually, now, isn't it?
Yeah, about 18 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've had roughly 35 million of investment in total.
Yep, that's about right.
So that's quite a long journey from a few guys with an idea in a university campus. And fill us in some of the gaps in that journey.
Yeah. I think it's one of the great aspects of startups, especially startups, founded by young teams, is that there's a certain, purity of optimism that allows them to just start the journey, right? So in the case of our founders, they were undergraduates at the Olin College of Engineering in Needham, Massachusetts, not far from where I'm sitting here. And they got very interested in deep learning. For folks in the machine learning world, Kaggle is sort of the competitive arena for data scientists. And they began to compete in these Kaggle competitions using deep learning instead of traditional machine learning. And they started to win these competitions over and over again. And they said, hey, this is, we're onto something here. And so they realized, though, that, deep learning, both because of sort of the compute required and the expertise required, was really not accessible to the enterprise, right? It was still very much an academic. This is, back at the sort of dawn of deep learning, very much an academic tool. So their North Star was, how do we bring that, into the hands of a business user? That was the sort of founding premise, and which is still true today, which I love. The North Star for Indico has never changed. So they built up this transfer learning approach and showed that they could help people build these custom machine learning models with a shockingly small amount of training data. So that was sort of the technical, moment of inspiration for them. As they built up this core capability, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Tom, I was just going to ask, transfer learning, could you define that for us?
Yes. So transfer learning is a deep learning technique that helps with the training data challenge within machine learning. So essentially what transfer learning is you take a training approach for problem A and you repurpose some percentage of that for an adjacent problem B. So because you can sort of recycle your training data, it accelerates, the model you're going to build for problem B. Now, that's very compelling as long as problem A and B are fairly close together, right? That training data is applicable to both. So what the founders at Indico did is they stepped back and they said, well, that's really, really useful, but it's kind of limiting. How do we make it such that it not only applies for problem A to B, but it can go from A to Z, right? It can span use cases, it can span domains, it can span industries. That was sort of the big idea they challenged themselves with. And that's what they accomplished, right? And they also did it with images. So, Indico now supports image, video, text, email, documents, et cetera. So that was the big idea they challenged themselves with, is how do we make this generally applicable so that we don't have to sort of rebuild the whole approach every time we encounter a new use case, every time we go from insurance to banking to healthcare. So that's the transfer learning benefit.
It's fascinating, and I particularly struggle, I think, when I try to imagine what it can do for video, for example. So what are you extracting from a video? When the video, unstructured data, lots of images, are we looking at words in that? Or are we looking at identifying objects in it? What actually happens?
Yeah, I think, going back to transfer learning for a moment. So the same way that, in the text world, a sort of contextual understanding of language allows you to apply, our approach, whether it's, insurance or banking, right? So that's the analogy there. With images, the same thing applies, right? You're able to, if you create a generic understanding of vision, of images, you're able to sort of deconstruct any image and reconstruct and understand its components, right? That may mean classifying an image. So in the real estate world, is this an image of a kitchen or a living room or a bedroom? That's a fairly, straightforward classification problem, and transfer learning allows you to do that, right? If you show it, a few dozen examples of a kitchen, it can basically genericize its understanding of what is a kitchen, right? Oh, there's a countertop, there may be stools, or maybe a table, there may be a sink. It's sort of creating this generic understanding of what is a kitchen. So when you show it any kind of kitchen photo, it says, oh, that's a kitchen. It doesn't matter if it's a, traditional kitchen or a modern kitchen, or, it still understands what a kitchen is. So in the case of images, I'll give you one example. We have a large customer in the commercial waste hauling industry. And so every time they pick up a commercial dumpster, they want to take a picture of that, either continuously through video on the truck or through a still image. And they want to classify what kind of container was this, and then they want to do some object detection. Think of that as the extraction equivalent, right, from text. They want to do some object detection from within that picture, which is, was there trash spilling out of this? Was there cardboard in a dumpster where there only should have been trash? Was there trash in a cardboard dumpster? Was there hazardous waste like paint cans? So those are sort of the extraction metaphor from images. So we process several billion of these images a year for them. And they're able to use that to improve their service delivery, to more accurately invoice the customer, to provide a audit trail for the customers who might say, why did I get billed, for an overage on Wednesday? And they can simply say, look, here's an image of your dumpster. It was overfilled, and so there's a premium charge for that. So that's a good example of the analogy of transfer learning in the image or video world.
It's incredibly smart. I want to, because this is the success end of this story, right? What are the funny moments? Because everyone has stories about AI misconstruing something radically, and usually with some quite amusing results. Did you, in all of your journey to get to this point, have you at least seen something really daft that we should know about?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think if it's ever made any like very peculiar, predictions or outcomes. I don't know that anything is jumping right to mind on that. I'll say that I think, where we see customers struggle and where we try to help them get off to a good start, which is why I think we've had such success in getting to production, is I always find it peculiar when we say, hey, we only need 200, training samples. And we'll say, how many of these transactions do you do a year? And they'll say, 150,000 or something. And we'll say, okay, we just need 200, samples to train on. And they'll say, well, we really can't put our hands on 200 samples. I always find that very strange. Like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like, are you really either serious about this or is your process different than what you actually perceive it to be? So sometimes those are head scratchers. I think the other is, really helping the customer define success at the end of the process. So we often want to jump to the end, right? Customers like to start at the beginning and talk about features and functions of our product. We want to start at the end and say, what is a successful outcome here? And then work backwards to, apply the right feature function and things of that nature.
It makes a great deal of sense to us at HFS, as I'm sure you know. That's very much our focus is on business value, business outcomes. I'm just wondering, in that context, as we think about how you're seeing the market right now, are people, what are people thinking they're buying when they're buying from you? Are they coming to you saying, you're exactly what we want? Is there still a lot of misunderstanding around even just automation, full stop? Because it's, who buys automation? You actually want it to do something and deliver something. And we do still see an awful lot of, I'm selling hyper automation, or I'm selling intelligent automation, but no one is actually selling those things. What are you seeing in the market in your conversations?
I think the number one thing is helping people understand that when people at the beginning of a process with us, we'll get a question which will be, how accurate is your solution? And we always push back and say, I understand the question, but it's the wrong question, right? What you should be asking is, how much effort is it to get to 100% accurate? Right? Because that's what you're really asking. If I asked you how accurate does your process need to be, I'd be shocked if you said 85% is fine, right? No one says that, because that means that 15% or it's actually incorrect. And no one wants to introduce, even 5% errors into a process they have. There is a belief they generally have that the way they're doing it today, which is generally manually, is 99% accurate. That's also often not the case, but no one has measured it. So we'll say to them, well, have you measured your current process, using good statistical analysis to know how accurate your current process is? The answer is always no. People just don't do that. So I think that we really work hard to articulate the idea that the bionic arm is the right way to think about this, that there is a human in the loop that is required generally to do some kind of curation. Not perhaps on every single document, not perhaps on every single field of a document, to use documents as our example, but some percentage will likely need curation. And in very, very sensitive use cases, like very large financial transactions like derivatives, not only is it not adequate to have just one person review it, oftentimes it's required that they have to have two people review every transaction, because the cost of an error could be $100 million, right? So the key is to understand where your tolerance is, but make sure that you're thinking about this in terms of, okay, there will be some human in the loop here to make this process work. So if a customer says, nope, it has to be, no intervention whatsoever, we'll generally say, I don't think that's a realistic view of automation generally, even things like RPA, unless you're doing very simple, pick up this piece of data and move it over to this system. That can be, truly automated. But even RPA is proven to be quite brittle, and there's this idea that, well, I built it and now it's just going to work. And that's not the case. Systems change and things break. So that sort of breaking change approach has to be built into your overall, ROI analysis in the RPA world. And a human in the loop definitely needs to be accounted for in the AI world.
So just on that, Tom, where do you find yourself competing if you're going for a piece of work? Who else is responding to that RFI, RFP?
I think there's sort of three categories of competitors, right? There is the traditional OCR folks that have been around for a long time, have large customer bases, but fairly old technology at this point that is not AI, and so is quite brittle. It doesn't really scale appropriately into these unstructured use cases. It's quite good at things like form parsing, right? So think of form parsing as the structured data equivalent of the unstructured world. You really can solve it with software. You don't need AI to parse forms. So there's a set of established competitors in that category. Then there's the cloud providers, which have a whole bunch of sort of tools and components around these use cases that you could assemble. But the analogy I like to use is, if you walked into a dealership and said, I'd like to buy this car, what you hope is the dealer pulls the car around front and you drive home. If you were to do that with one of the big cloud providers, they would bring you out a box of parts and say, here's your car. And you'd say, well, I don't understand, where is the car? And they say, well, it's in the box here. You just have to assemble it and then you can drive it home. So if you're up for that, then that's a way you could buy the car. So, that's a narrow slice of the market that really wants to do that, because I think what they quickly realize is, well, shoot, not only do I have to build these models, but I'm also essentially building a very complex software application that I'm going to have to care and feed for the rest of its life, right? So that's the big aha moment, which is generally not a good surprise, that the line of business says, well, who's going to maintain this complex software application that we've now built on a totally custom basis. And then the third is sort of newer upstarts, newer entrants like Indico that really have some core technology, that could be AI or sort of machine learning that is used to apply against this. And the competitors attack this in various ways. Some are very, very technical tools. Some are more geared towards sort of the structured or semi-structured side of the equation. And then we see ourselves as differentiated in terms of the combination of this core transfer learning advantage and, very importantly, this very, very user-friendly, efficient application interface that we've built to really deliver the complete, human-machine sort of intersection.
So where does this take you in the next 12 to 18 months?
I think that the way we describe our value delivery is what we call the 3 A's. So automate, analyze, apply. Automate is where we started for obvious reasons, right? There was a huge groundswell around automation. RPA certainly sparked that. Customers gained success with RPA and then asked, what's next, right? And what else can we automate? We've seen gains from RPA. And typically it took them almost immediately to unstructured data. The other branch was, process mining and those kind of applications that is another spur of sort of the automation world. In our case, it's unstructured data. And that was typically, something they looked to tackle next. So we focus very hard on helping people automate processes involving unstructured data. Once they've done that, the next question they ask is, well, how can I get better insights from my unstructured data? How I can improve my decision-making from my unstructured data? And that's analyze, right? So that is doing discovery inside unstructured data sets, search, comparison. Now that I have some structure around this unstructured, how do I gain insights from that? So the good example of that was that sort of actuarial use case example I gave earlier. So there's a suite of features we have inside the application that address that, and many more coming on the roadmap. And then I think the third is apply. I have a sort of a belief now that we're sort of nearing the end of SaaS, the first SaaS boom, right? Which is the benefit of SaaS, which is I can stand up these new applications very quickly because my vendor takes care of infrastructure and they take care of application. That's all great, but what it's caused is the enterprise now has hundreds of panes of glass they have to look through to accomplish their tasks. And the enterprise is saying, okay, it's unruly now. We want to bring this back to the enterprise being able to define what our application experience is. So they want to consolidate those panes of glass. They want to build more of a data fabric underneath it, and the interface itself gets designed and dictated by the enterprise. So that's apply. We want to continue to extend our capabilities around what I'll call headless, right? So some customers really value the application, but increasingly they want to deconstruct that into components and APIs, weave it back together into existing or future applications so that they get the benefits of our approach, but they also can more standardize and consolidate the application experiences.
Is there a risk that those are the same customers as you described, that group that are quite happy with their deconstructed car in a box and ready to put these things together? Are those the same people who want headless, or is it not a crossover there?
No, I don't. I think those are fundamentally different, right? So what they don't want to do is assemble these parts from scratch and have to do all the heavy lifting. So I think a better analogy would be that they want to buy chassis, they want to buy a complete engine and transmission layout. So I think it's a little bit of a middle ground there, that they want to kind of they want to start with the basics of a car, but maybe they want to add things to it or modify it in a way that it looks like their own car. So I think that's the better analogy.
Custom car builders. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So finally, let's look a bit further out. So we've talked about what you're doing now for the next year or so. Where do you see Indico ending up? What kind of business can you become? And what kind of scale of business have you got in mind? I think maybe 5 years out, or what your plans are, if you have any intention to grow into other markets, if you want to partner with people, if you're planning to ultimately exit. I don't know what the ambitions are. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of start at a high level. I think it's just amazing that 90% of data in the enterprise is unstructured. Yet, the amount of investment and focus and R&D for the past 25 years has all been around structured data. Very, very little around unstructured. And so you have this sort of incredible white space that is unsolved, still to this day. I think the reason for that is the state of technology for the past 25 years just hasn't been adequate to solve it. And that has suddenly changed, right? And we think that we're at the very forefront of that. So I think you're going to find, our 5-year vision is 5 years from now, we're going to look back and see that unstructured data became its own segment of the data landscape. We'll all look back on that and say, well, of course it did. It had to be. There's too much value there for it to be, opaque and sort of unactivated, within the enterprise. So I think we're going to see that unstructured becomes a multi-billion-dollar category unto itself. There'll be a small handful of winners there, as there typically are, when a new segment comes to life. And we certainly think we're going to be that winner. I think that we get there through expanding into additional verticals. I think life sciences and healthcare are still very early on their journey, and those are going to be huge verticals. International, there's a very robust market in Europe and Asia for unstructured that's emerging. Those are certainly opportunities. And then I think, partnerships. So, sort of Indico inside powering many applications that wish they could deal with unstructured but can't today. If you think about platforms like banking platforms or insurance platforms that documents make up a critical part of what they're delivering to the customer. But today, it's not much more than it's a file storage, right? Like, oh, here's your document. You can open the document. That's about it. There's no intelligence around what's in that document. What kind of document is that? So there's a whole, ocean of opportunity in that direction as well. So those things make up, the major piece parts of our strategy looking sort of 5 years out.
That sounds very exciting. There's an awful lot to go out there. Is there any final message you'd like to give to those fine folk listening and watching this video cast?
Yeah, I mean, I think we describe it, if you kind of look at our marketing, as the unstructured data imperative. And I think that word, it's obviously deliberate. I think it is an imperative now that we're seeing more and more, Fortune 500s deciding that unstructured itself is a sort of top 3, data initiative. And that's really exciting. I think you go from line of business wanting to solve specific use cases to the enterprise deciding that they can actually create a competitive advantage by tapping what has been historically, an opaque set of data. I think it's, at this point in time, there's no argument that every company, I don't care what industry you're in, you are a data company, right? By definition, you must think of yourselves as a data company in some way, that you must believe you can create competitive advantage with your data. It's a proprietary asset. It's no different than, a physical factory or the research scientists you employ if you're in oil and gas. It is an asset. It has to be leveraged and create competitive advantage. And so, this giant block of data that you're not activating is the next big opportunity.
Tom Wilde, CEO of Indico Data, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks so much, David. I enjoyed it.